And remember, still two solutions here. Let's do another one with a different from 1. So remember, check first and see if your constant term is moved. If so, you're good. Now, a is different from 1, so we're going to factor out that number. So if I factor out an 8, I'm left with x squared plus 2x equals 42. All right, so now we're going to take half our middle number and square it. So half of b, 2 divided by 2 squared. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. So we're going to add in 1 on both sides. Remember, because our a value, we factored out that number, we have to put that on the other side along with this number. So we have 8x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 50. All right, we're going to write it as a binomial squared now. Remember, it's an x, the sign of b, and half of b equals 50. Okay. Now, remember, this number in front, we have a number, so our next step is to divide by 8s on both sides. So I have x plus 1 squared equals 50 over 8. Now we're going to square root. So x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 50 over 8, the square root of 8. All right. So this is going to simplify to x plus 1 equals plus or minus 5 square root 2 divided by 2 square root 2. The square roots of 2 are going to cancel. So now I have x plus 1 equals plus or minus 5 over 2. Subtract 1 on both sides. So x equals negative 1 plus or minus 5 over 2. So that means negative 1 plus 5 halves, which equal 3 halves. Or negative 1 minus 5 halves, which equals negative 7 halves. Okay. All right, so we're going back to some of them where a equal 1. I want to just work with some fractions because I know everybody loves fractions. So step 1 is to add our constant. So we have x squared minus 5x equals 67. So now we take half of the middle number and square it. So negative 5 divided by 2 squared. That is going to be a positive 25 over a positive 25 over 4. Okay. So I added it on this side. I'm going to add it in on this side. It is okay that it's a fraction. That is perfectly all right. Leave it as a fraction. Don't change it to a decimal. Just leave it. All right? So that means we have x squared minus 5x plus 25 over 4 equals 293 over 4. Yes, it's still a fraction. Leave it as a fraction. You're going to be happy you did later. So let's write this out as a binomial squared. So I have x minus half the middle number, because that's the sign is a minus, equals 293 over 4. Square root both sides, square root both sides. So x minus 5 halves equals plus or minus the square root of 293 over 4. Well, now you're going to end up with x minus 5 halves equal plus or minus the square root of 293, because you can't simplify that, over 2 because the square root of 4 is 2. We're going to add 5/2 to both sides. So we have x equal 5/2 plus or minus 293, the square root of 293 over 2. And remember, it's two answers here. Please keep it as a fraction. Don't change it to a decimal. Okay, let's do another one. We see our constant term is already on the other side. So our next step is to take half the middle number and square it. So half of -7 and square is going to be 49 over 4. Leave it as a fraction. So we're going to add in 49 over 4 equals 4 plus 49 over 4. All right. Change this 4 to red since the other ones were red. So we know we added in. Okay. So 49 divided by 4 is our new C value. So our new equation is going to be x squared minus 7x plus 49 over 4 equals 65 over 4. Right, this side is a binomial squared. So we got x minus, because this is a subtraction sign, half of b, which is 7 over 2, equals 65 over 4. Square root both sides. So x minus 7 over 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 65 over the square root of 4. So we're going to have x minus 7/2 equals plus or minus the square root of 65. Remember, see if you can simplify it. If not, leave it as it is. Over the square root of 4, which we know is 2. So I'm going to have x minus 7 over 2 equals plus or minus square root of 65 over 2. We're going to add 7/2 to both sides. So x equals 7 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 65 over 2. Okay, that's the end of the video. You can go back through and review these steps. I tried to limit it to 5 steps here. So we move our constant term to the other side of the equal sign. We look at the a value. If it's a number different from 1, we have to factor that number out of the problem. Then we proceed to the next step to find the new c value. Then we're going to write our problem as a binomial squared. And you could go ahead and take the square root of both sides. If not, you might have to divide, which is okay. That only happens when your a value is different from 1. Then you're going to solve the equation for x and simplify. All right, if you have any questions, leave me a comment below. And for my students, I'll see you in class for your questions. Thank you.